Všetko začalo v roku 2018, keď prvýkrát sa k nám na IZP...
It all started in 2018 when for the first time for the Institute of our analysis, Professor Rodinsky contacted us and he was visiting us very often and I saw him more often than my former girlfriend. So until we agreed that we will work together, it's on two projects. First project was the neuro and spondylosurgery for children, and the second was the project of this SCI unit in Nové Zámky. You saw this nice graphic illustration. Both projects were calculated and budgeted for this neurosurgery. We managed to implement it, and this SCI unit was already prepared, but unfortunately the pandemic broke out. There was so much money flowing into healthcare system and 1.5 billion euros for investments, but unfortunately the small project disappeared as far as their budget was concerned. So unfortunately the decision makers decided they were discussing whether a hospital should be for 500 million or 600 million, but we asked only for much less, and that's why this smaller project got somehow lost. That's why I was quite happy when I got in touch again with President Riapos, and we started with this initiative again, and we got the opportunity to continue on this project. And I think 2 weeks ago we handed it over to the director for the recovery and resilience plan, who is responsible for it. So I want to say thank you to all of the people who helped, and we managed to conclude this project and we handed it over, and now it's really about putting it on the list of projects and that it will be implemented in the course of time. Regarding this project, it is a specific problem we dealt with. Maybe you don't know, but Slovakia is great about collecting data regarding patients. And together with Miška, on behalf of a different project, we made a big project for an American Chamber of Commerce, and we found out that we have 9,003 different types of registers of patients. So all the lines are being collected. So it's 9,003 different lines of information that are being collected. What is not included are COVID data. So the question here is, and you already heard the answers, like out of these lines, how many help us to identify that, yes, this is a patient with a spinal injury, what care does this patient receive? And the answer to this question is, like, unfortunately nothing. We don't find out anything. We cannot identify a spinal patient, let's call it. You could say, yeah, that's great, we don't want to be monitored by the state. I do understand this on one side, and I agree, but we have to mention that since 2018 or 19, this whole system, how budgeting works, this is what now Minister Matovic is responsible for. This system has changed to a very technocratic one. They require exact data, and once they don't have exact data, they don't care. So it is a key issue to have relevant data. And now a few examples, how data are being used, how they can be used, what we try to achieve, and what we would recommend to implement. Well, what you can see now, I don't know if you are fans of studying budgets. This is table 79 of the state budget, and here is an overview how health insurance should spend their budget. So the state defines how much the health insurance companies should spend. So this is exactly prescribed, let's say. It is 1.7 billion euros, and now spa care is 46, transport care is 37. So the state dictates how the health insurance companies should use their resources. But what's behind are exact calculations of investments that have to take place. And Many of you know probably that you would not manage to get rehabilitation on time, or that you would need to co-finance, or you would need to get grants from abroad. And this is exactly what is behind it, are the calculations behind the budget, which exponentially grows every year, and it makes the whole issue problematic to solve the issue of data. So the budget looks at the last year base, and now the officers look at how much was budgeted from the last year, but then they take into consideration the inflation, salary increase, interest rates, and so on. So these are the no policy changes. This is what is calculated for this year, is 219 million. But now the second line is policy changing, so that they want to decrease waiting times, or they want to provide for some care. We do have some reserves here due to COVID and so on. So this line, as we don't have data about spinal patients, the Ministry of Health cannot increase this amount so that Kovachova Center has bigger limits, could expand more. So this is this barrier, bureaucratic barrier behind it. This blocks the resources. Then another topics are savings and so on. So the rest is 150 million. These are the expected realities to make the budget work in the limits that were predefined. So only then we could go to the Minister of Health and show him, like, these are the facts. We know, we have the data of patients. We know that if they receive early care, how much they can help them, that we need these SCI units and so on. But this is what we need exact data regarding the patients for. Another reason is that not only that the Ministry of Health decides about how the money from the health insurances will be used, but also the capital unit. So we have a methodology of assessing investments. It's like a guideline, 70 pages guideline, which speaks about the project, either from capital funds or from European funds, how they can be financed. So this is a calculation of the cost efficiency once I invest into something, and what are the direct benefits on the society. So this is a short description, that it's a really big exercise, numeric exercise. Again, exact data are needed to provide to the Ministry of Health, explaining, like, okay, once you invest into the SCI units, it will return in how many years and so on. So the question here remains, how did we handle this, and how did we manage to submit something at the ministry? And the Ministry of Health accepted it, and now the Ministry of Finance also is declaring that there are no more not many problems with it. So we, together with my colleague Mishka, we went through all the data and showed, and we set some limits. We started with the National Center of Healthcare Information. It is NCZI. It's a big portal, not very flexible. It's a national portal, but it's the entity that should collect all the data, all the information provided by the society. We looked at all the reports, yearbooks, everything that this national center publishes, and also Professor showed it, the number of surgeries, no number of hospitalizations. The numbers are very high, but they don't give exact data regarding some spinal injuries and so on. But the potential here is that up to 5,000 patients per year could have suffered spinal cord injury, but we are not sure about it. It could be a maximum number. But when we look at the number of surgeries in this category, it looks that it can be even over 10,000. So it looks like nonsense, but we are not able to use this data. Unfortunately, this data cannot be used. They are too big, the limits are too high, and includes a high number of other surgeries as well. So we looked at data that are usually not available. And these are the data which the operational center of rescue center, when you call 112, this emergency number, this is the center that they pick up the phone and send an ambulance to the patient. So we had a meeting with the director of the center, and we discussed whether we should be able, based on their data, to identify possible patients. So they helped us to identify the exact code they use, because they need to report also all the trips and so on. So we checked this data. They provided us with this information. And once we looked at the numbers, like how many it was per year, the diagnosis or the reason or the cause of transport, it was the spinal cord injury. Without all this data, well, guess how many? 5. So it was 5. So we could not use this source of data either. So probably they didn't know what to report, how to report. Maybe it was a car accident and so on, with different diagnoses. So and injuries to many other organs. So what the conclusion was that we were not able to use this data as well. The third attempt were data from the Ministry of Health. You would say Ministry of Health has the best data, but that's not true. They have data from the National Center, but they have a special source of information or data, as the ministry coordinates the payments. This is DRG system, collecting information, redefines them, evaluates them, and then sets the payments for the health insurance companies. We had a meeting with President Riapos and Minister Lengvarski, and the Ministry of Health, or the minister, promised that not only supporting our project, he also promised us to offer us data in a usable structure, so we would be able to check the number of patients. However, in those cases, they could help us identifying patients with spinal cord injuries, or the spinal patients. We had up to 400 hospitalizations, because we were not able to state whether they were again or renewally, or what was the reason. So it didn't have to be the accident, but we were getting closer to the number we needed, because 400 is better than 10,000 or 5. So based on this DRG data, when you look at all the reforms that are taking place in the hospitals, we used to call it stratification. These are the data that can be used for setting the system. So they are getting or closer to the most exact. What we didn't know from this data, whether the injuries were permanent, how many new patients we have per year. It was a key information we needed to be able to define the need for staff and the need for the SCI units. And to set the whole financial model. So we went through all the alternatives from 10,000 to 5 patients per year. So we decided that it would be best to look abroad. Examples from abroad, ask colleagues how many patients they have, so we could approximate our data. And yes, Professor helped us. And well, the final estimation is about 120 to 150 spinal patients per year, new patients. It is a benchmark to the neighboring countries or the countries with similar situations. So these are not exact data. It's not on the level as we imagined. To find the patients and to pair all the costs with the patients and to compare the quality, it is not the best, but at least it is sufficient to be able to model the system of SCI units, and so we would be able to submit it to the Ministry of Health. So we really went through the whole process, from the most frequently used data to the data that we had access to only thanks thanks to President Riapos, who convinced the minister and the Ministry of Health. So we really suppose that the Ministry of Health should accept our submitted data, because we will not get any better ones. What is necessary also to start a database to register, start a database for registering spinal patients. We already have registers for oncological patients, for patients with diabetes. So we need this kind of register to know their health conditions, their needs, their demands, whether they have early care, sufficient care. So decisions should be made on data that should be as exact as possible. So we would be able to identify patients with SCI sufficiently and early. And it is also a thing that we, again, need to discuss with the colleagues from the National Center of Healthcare Information. As I have mentioned with my colleague Miška, we are cooperating on cleaning up all the data. Some more technical data or details that are necessary. We need to calculate cost efficiency of this project, then also submit a demand to increase the budget, to increase the capacity in the rehabilitation centers in Kovačova and elsewhere. So really to make this healthcare more accessible, more available. And I really believe that we will start collecting this kind of data. That's all from my side regarding data and data sources. So I have tried to explain how we worked and that we have submitted data to the Ministry of Health. I want to say again thank you to Professor, to President, and to the colleagues. Thanks for the support and for the cooperation. And I really believe that when we meet in a year's time at the same conference, that we will at least have some basic data of our registry, and we will know the reaction of the Ministry of Health and the project of SCI units. That was Mr. Martin Smatana.
So we still have some time, so we will talk for a while. So the registers, I'll start from the end. This is a wonderful thing, registers. If we have register, everything would be easier because we know who is who needs what. But we have several registers in Slovakia, but they are in a very bad state. So even if the law implements such a register, how can we ensure that it is not bad? Because the register will only be good if it's filled with good data by people, but if they don't want to do it, this won't be a success. Well, we don't have even agreement on this because we have more modern solutions, which are automatical data collection platforms. This is some kind of an intermediate solution before we can get to the automatic ones. But if we have a look at what registers are the best, are registers by orthopedics or spondylo surgeons. They have quite good data because if the given expert society does the register, then and people care about it, then the quality is good. So if professor, unless he retires, he said that if this project is adopted, he will retire. So if he is in charge, I think the register will be of sufficient quality. Okay, let's keep our fingers crossed. I thought about another data analysis, for example, to have a look at wheelchair users, because the health insurance company pays for the wheelchair. Yes, of course, we have checked this data, but it can be paid from health care insurance or social insurance, but we don't have the other data from this information, from the wheelchair users' information. And not even mentioning that we had data from the social insurance company connected with the health insurance company, but we haven't been able to calculate the real numbers. Miška dealt with this topic personally. Perhaps she will add what needs to be added, but we had some discrepancies here, and we tried these registers, but it wasn't possible. Well, let's call Miška here. You mentioned her several times, so everybody is curious what she looks like. This is Miška Laktišová.
A príde nám to celé vysvetliť.
And she will come here to explain everything. So, if I remember, the problem with wheelchairs was that we couldn't say which people are just temporary users and which are permanent users of wheelchairs. Then we also had duplicities, various revision activities which cause some time shifts. And isn't this depressive for you that we have no data? Yes, and that is the reason why we finished at the ministry. Miška works in the National Ecological Institute, but we still have one project at the ministry which we are working on with the ministry to clean the data. So since summer 2020 we are working on this. We mapped all the data, we had a look at duplicities, quality, and we are now trying to change Act number 153 to make sure that the data are accessible in some kind of normal structure, so that the oncological registers change as well, so that we have a huge amount of data, but we don't use them and don't work with them. So this is depressing, but we are trying to change this. So you are optimists. A huge round of applause for Michal Smatana and Ms. Laktišová.